Okay, guys, I think I'm ready to get started. Let's see. It doesn't matter, I guess, that I can be seen in the camera because it's really going to be, hopefully, it's self-explanatory. So the slides are already in Backagent for this sort of thing. The title is a little misleading, but for whatever reason, I decided that was going to be the title, and then I never really clarified. So I just want to clarify to start out. We're not really talking about like real estate trends like tiny houses or virtual staging or drones or anything like that. We're really talking about kind of how to talk about the market in 2019. Just a lot of it's just based on kind of Bill's and my ongoing study of the marketplace, some of the conferences and kind of panel discussions that we've been to over the last year. And I don't know, just what I think a good educated guess at what the market will be like in 2019, just kind of in a variety of ways, right? So we'll probably talk for like 40 minutes and then have questions. And, you know, this is our first week. We're just kind of getting started trying this deal of having these ongoing trainings throughout the week. If we like this, if this is a success, we think it's sustainable, then it would be similar to this. You know, Tuesdays, your typical sales meeting with Bill, and Wednesday and Thursday would be some staff member, whether it's Rhonda or me or Maria, and then we would bring in these outside companies, outside vendors. Star sent me somebody from Allegiance Bank, I think, and so we're still open to suggestions, right? So we're just going to keep doing this. We'll take a break probably the week before Christmas, and then we'll pick back up probably the week of New Year's, because New Year's is the 1st. We maybe would not have one on the 2nd, but we would have one on the 3rd and the 4th is what I'm shooting for. So we'll just see how that goes. Anyway, so let's just dive right in. So what got us to thinking about this, let's see if this works. Is last week, Bill and Mario and I went to this luncheon at the Urban Land Institute. So if you're not familiar with the Urban Land Institute, it is mostly, it's an international organization, and they are mostly focused on commercial real estate, and it's, you know, anybody can join. We are members of the Urban Land Institute. Boulevard Realty is a member of the Urban Land Institute. But mostly it's commercial developers, commercial investors, like the Rick Campos of the world, that sort of thing. And they're studying all kind of urban land and all urban real estate, but they tend to focus heavily on the commercial and multifamily side, right? But they produce these great market reports. They do this annual study called Emerging Trends in Real Estate, which is also a misleading title because it's really just kind of a state of the market or a market outlook. Every year with PricewaterhouseCoopers. So that's what we went to, and we got to thinking about this sort of stuff. So I highly encourage you to go and sign up at uli.org for their newsletter. They just give nice little snippets. You get some of these reports, like the one that we discussed at this meeting or whatever. It's heavily focused again toward like commercial real estate stuff. And so that's why I don't really want to dig too much into the actual meat of the report. I'm just going to give you kind of some big takeaways that we have. You know, I thought it was really useful. It's good to watch commercial real estate just because a lot of the money that kind of flows our way into residential real estate, it's tied to the confidence and the investor confidence in the commercial world. So like, I think about George Lee. Does anybody know who George Lee is? Anybody ever, that name doesn't sound familiar to anybody? So George Lee is a money guy in Houston, right? And he was one of Jacob Sudoff's biggest investors for a long time, right? Now it kind of rings a bell. He was one of Sudoff's main investors for a while, and he's even gone, you know, into the single family world. So like, I don't know that River Oaks project on Westheimer, I don't know that has his money, but some of the other kind of condos that Jacob Sudoff was involved in. But then that money flows to Bradley Smith. George Lee was a Bradley Smith investor. He invested in that house 923 Teetshorn, which is one of the, I think, Smith & Wesson's better houses. And so the way we see it is these worlds are kind of intertwined, right? And so if you are sitting down at a table and hearing what George Lee thinks about the commercial and multifamily market, then those are going to be good indicators for the single family market, particularly new construction, particularly our price point, and that sort of stuff. So one of the things we learned was, right now these commercial guys and these multifamily guys are very, very confident. They feel really, really good about the market with some caveats. I was hoping that we would go in and kind of get more of a balance, maybe, slightly kind of pessimistic view. But I mean, this study they do with PricewaterhouseCoopers, it's based on their surveys, right? And so I told Kathleen after we came, it's like asking a bunch of drug addicts, are there going to be more drugs in 2019, right? The answer is going to be yes, because they want it to be good for them. And so they are very, very high on the market right now, but they set some kind of realistic expectations. And we'll talk about what kind of those expectations are. But the gist of it and why they're so confident is because as far as they're concerned, and these are the money guys of the world, and they're the money guys of Houston and Boston and all these major metro real estate markets, is there is a lot of cash to go around. They're just really liquid, right? And so there's not a lot of people who have their money tied up in the stock market or in commodities or anything like that. They're focusing on these kind of big multifamily projects, kind of like, and real estate trusts. A lot of these guys have their money in what do they call them? REITs, right? I think it's so stupid. It's so easy to just say real estate investment trust. And so their money is kind of insulated elsewhere. It kind of lives elsewhere than the volatility of the commodities markets and all of that sort of stuff. And that's Bill's general take too, is that there's just a lot of liquidity. There's a lot of cash to go around. We see the kind of impact that has on our market on like a granular block by block level. We'll talk about that later or whatever. Yeah, they think the market's going to be strong in 2019. They have a lot of cash to play with. They, conceivably have a lot of cash to lose. And so they're going to continue taking these risks on big commercial projects, big industrial projects, big, retail space and all that sort of stuff. But they all said, and we all agree, and we all think that this is pretty obvious, that what we're in right now is the late period of our economic cycle, right? So let's see, yeah. So I think that we tend to think that where we are in this, economic cycle is that we're still kind of in recovery mode. And I think it's because we, as a whole country, got our butts kicked so greatly starting in the fall of 2009 with the Great Recession. And then just as we were, as a nation, starting to experience some recovery from that, which was probably like in 2012 and all of that sort of stuff, then we here in Texas got, really high on this fracking boom and the oil, at $100-something a barrel and all that sort of stuff. And so we developed an incredibly short memory for kind of what we expect, how we expected the economy to perform, right? And so what happened to us in 2015 and 2016, whenever there was too much supply in the marketplace, and whenever the oil dropped from $100 a barrel to $33 a barrel, literally overnight, then it kind of created this whiplash for us. And so we lost sight of the fact that really we're in this kind of prolonged expansion. Like we got out of recovery mode in 2012, and then we started to get into expansion mode. So I think a lot of times we think of ourselves as like, oh, but we're still recovering from 2009. But the reality is we're really wrapping up this economic cycle right now. And these commercial guys tended to agree, is that we're at the tail end of a pretty long expansion. So when we go to Ted Jones next month, we're going to hear him talk about it, but he's going to agree that this has been a nice long stretch of, your economic cycles are typically going to last 6, 8, 9 years, something like that. We're going into year 10. The longest in the last century is about 12 or 14 years. And so we've had a really, really good run. And Bill and I tend to agree that this is probably our last good year before some recession. Not a bad one, just not a great recession, not a big recession, just your typical recession, which in a normal economic cycle, outside of a housing bubble and all that sort of stuff, is pretty gradual. You know, we talk about the Great Depression and then we talk about the Great Recession. It's not, and I guess we talk about oil crisis in the 70s and all that sort of stuff. But these things happen all the time and we don't think that it's the end of the world. And so that's kind of what we want to do today, is just arm ourselves with information so that maybe at the end of 2019 or in 2020, whenever things start to slow down in the broader market or on some macroeconomic level, that we're able to kind of instill some confidence in our clients and to our audience or whatever. That it's just not the end of the world. These things run in cycles. What goes up must come down, and we're just getting to the tail end of this sort of cycle here. Tying in kind of what these commercial guys said and then just our general kind of read on the market, we think there's some good, bad, and ugly, as with everything, right? So they echoed a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about here just generally. People are more into this urban density mode, which we know in the Heights, because that's just kind of been our story for the last 20 years as this market's really shot up in value. But that's starting to spread elsewhere. So you've noticed this too. Sugar Lands, Town Center, and the Woodlands, what do we call it? Market Street in the Woodlands, right? So it's not just in your urban core, but then in the suburbs too, the housing trend, the main thing that people really desire is denser, kind of mixed use space, not so spread out, not have to drive 3 miles to get to a Target and all that sort of stuff, make the Target look like some old brick building and all that sort of stuff. So, along with that, you have this kind of increased desire for mixed use amenities, kind of like what we're going to have at our office. And we think that's going to be a new normal. Again, we've kind of been living it and experiencing it and pushing for it in the Heights for the last 20 years. So it doesn't seem so groundbreaking to us, but you have, you know, these $1.5 million houses and then a major thoroughfare with bus stops all along it. And then you have our building, which is going to be a real estate office, a weird kind of pasta shop, some ice cream place, and a dentist, just like this kind of vibrant urban scene, right? Seems obvious to us, but it is actually like an up and coming trend in a lot of markets. So this urban density piece, the multifamily housing, this is pretty interesting to me. So these guys who, provide the money for Camden and Amley and Elon, Greystar Apartments, Alexan, all that sort of stuff. So I've been saying for the last couple of years that I think that we were overbuilt in the apartment market, and that was going to create some kind of, weird, pricing fluctuation, and people were going to think it was a bad thing, but it's because in 2013, 2014, we were so high on everything that we, built too many apartments and made the rents, $225 a square foot, and then we're going to leave them empty. So I was convinced that we were overbuilt and that was going to be a bad thing for our economy, was that we had all these expensive Class A apartments. But these guys, these commercial guys, seem to believe that we're actually not quite as overbuilt as I guess I thought. And that we need more housing. They did concede a little bit that the prices in Houston and in Dallas, particularly like in Texas, that we price them a little high. And then you put yourself in this situation where, think about it, your leases are a year, 2 years, or whatever. And so if you think that the economy is going to get better, rather than start to concede on the pricing side, then you would rather just leave it empty. Because if you think that, after we recover from this kind of oil pause, oil uncertainty, that people are going to get hired again and all of that sort of stuff, then you don't want to lock yourself into a lease for 2 years for $1,800 a month when you really think you can get $2,200 a month next year, right? And so this is a good thing, that we're going to be building more apartments and all that sort of stuff. We'll talk about this this podcast that Bill was on a couple of months ago or a couple of weeks ago, and just a little bit. But they're building this high rise in Midtown, and they're just really confident that we need that level of housing in Midtown. I would have thought that the apartments, the Pearl, which has not 100% occupancy, that was enough, but these people are basically saying we need more housing. So that's fine, because then that's going to be labor, and that's going to be construction and jobs and all that sort of stuff. So this urban density is a good thing to them. This building more apartments and shit like that is good for them. And then they were talking about, and I don't want to spend too much time on this because I don't quite understand what they were getting at, but their big emerging trend for 2019 is that they believe we're going to have a lot of industrial real estate going on, particularly in Texas and particularly in Houston. So that makes sense to me. Like, I don't know why it would increase now, because we've always had the port, we've always had petrochemicals, we've always had plenty of jobs here. We didn't get Amazon or whatever. So I don't understand why we would have a particularly high level of industrial real estate going on, but it's going to mean that we're going to be manufacturing some goods here. So that stuff going in and out of the port. Remember that we make money on stuff that goes in and out of the port. So that's good for our local economy. And then that's going to mean steady job growth. And so we'll look at these job numbers in just a little bit. But I don't really understand why they think we're going to have so much industrial real estate, factories, and wherever trains load up or whatever. I don't know. I don't get it, but they seem to think that's going to be a good thing for our economy, and they're going to be investing a lot of money in this industrial real estate, right? I guess warehouses too, logistics, that sort of stuff.
Somebody was asking me about industrial things. I've been doing more of that. My husband's in the oil and gas.
Yeah.
And they said it's because it's more oil production, more things done in Houston.
Okay.
They're exporting a lot more. It's going to grow like crazy.
Okay, I can see that.
We're looking at 2 offices for them.
Where would they be? Texas City.
And one in Freeport.
Oh, interesting.
But it's like everywhere. And then all those jobs bring more people. And I think that's what they were saying. But it sounds like it's booming.
That's what I guess we're hearing.
Yeah,
right?
and in parts that we're not really used to working in, but
yeah,
they're all going to grow.
And I don't know if we want to work in them anymore. But it seems like it's going to be good times for that sort of deal or whatever. I get nervous about the hurricanes and, affecting those areas. And so, okay, maybe we have a lot of jobs. Maybe we have a lot of new, activity in those areas. But then one good hurricane and then it's all devastated or whatever. So anyway, clearly I don't want to be more optimistic about this, but everybody else is. So this is a good thing. Ann's experiencing it right now, right? And then the last kind of major good thing, which, whatever, just completely apolitically, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act at the end of 2017 is giving all of these guys a lot of confidence, because there were some things that were very favorable to them and could be very favorable to us. I mean, it could impact us directly. So remember, whenever the Tax Cut and Jobs Act or the Trump tax cuts or the Paul Ryan tax cuts, whatever you want to call them, whenever they were coming into play, we got a little worried about the mortgage interest deduction cap, which didn't impact our market significantly. We just have seen no appreciable impact from the mortgage interest deduction cap. It just doesn't affect. I think it still has to do with all of this cash and liquidity being in our marketplace. That was a mortgage interest deduction cap. And then the other thing that people kind of nationally were concerned about was the state and local tax, whatever exemption, and that we don't have that here. And so it just didn't affect us at all. Anyway, so for these guys who may have a little bit of money in Texas and a little bit of money in California and a little, moving money from California, then that stuff did kind of impact them greatly, particularly with the, whatever, state and local income tax. But then, and this is a hot topic, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more, not too much because we don't know that much about it yet, but, kind of embedded in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act of 2017 was this very nebulous thing called federal opportunity zones. And so it was written into the kind of legislation package, but it was very vague and nobody quite knew what it was. But it's some kind of IRS, it's a section in the tax code that allows you to take your deferred capital gains taxes by, instead of doing like a 1031 exchange, investing into in some way, investing your capital gains into these kind of high needs areas. We'll look at that in just a little bit. But so Bill and I went to this luncheon on Thursday of last week, and like the Tuesday before, because this is a function of the IRS, the Treasury had just released some memo that spelled out what the areas were and how, the different kind of mechanisms where you could use this kind of tax advantage or whatever. And so these guys were like super excited about it because it can, we'll see. It's not a big deal to cover right now. So that's the good stuff that these guys were very happy about and very confident about, okay? The bad stuff is, and we all know this, right? So when there first started to be a lot of tariffs on, whatever, steel and lumber and all that sort of stuff, then we knew that it was going to kind of keep the cost to build a house kind of steadily on the rise. That hasn't really gone away. That is still a real concern, but it's been kind of a gradual increase. So I wish I could remember specifically the numbers, but I saw our builder, DJ Palmore, he's David James Custom Builder. He works out of our Kirby office, and I asked him, so what is it costing you to build a foot? Because I remember whenever he was building his house on Tangley, it was a house that we sponsored on the Westview Festival of Homes in 2013. And, the cost to build an award-winning showcase, beautiful custom home in 2012, 2013 was about $140 a square foot. Not talking about the land, just talking about the cost of construction, a beautiful house in Westview. And I asked him, I was like, so what do you have today? Like 160, 180 a square foot? He's like, no, I'm over 200 a square foot to build a house today. And he's kind of, he's all over the place, Southgate, Afton Oaks, that sort of thing. And so, that's a huge jump over the course of 5 years or whatever. And these tariffs certainly didn't really help. And then
it's especially true if you bought the lot at a time period in which it was high.
Yeah.
So your cost of holding that lot and there's an increased cost of sale.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So you have high costs, and then you have a labor shortage. So you have these really expensive houses that suck, right? They just, their quality is just really crappy. So then just generally, and so then to get a good house, a good quality house, then that makes it even more expensive, right? So these two things are kind of tied together, but not really. But we just still have this labor shortage. So Bill gives this kind of anecdote all the time, which is, you have this kind of slowdown in building because the price of land shoots up, or because the price of material shoots up, and so then you kind of, or you're just a couple of years out from the financial crisis, and then you have a oil kind of mini crisis or whatever, downturn, I think is what we call it. So then the money gets kind of funny, right? And so then the money kind of dries up, and you stop your construction projects. Those guys go find a job elsewhere, right? So where it used to be very lucrative to be, on a construction crew for a single-family residential building, then you go and you work for CenterPoint instead, and then you have a good deal going with CenterPoint, so you just stay there, right? And so then that labor shortage kind of prolongs. Then you have an election where all you're talking about is immigration, and I was trying to even remember some of the bad stuff that was said at that time, but I just can't remember. But you have all of this kind of negative PR about immigration in general that then, almost 2 years later, that's still kind of the narrative, right? We have this terrible, diseased, violent migrant caravan that's, fighting to get into the country, and right,
With rocks, yes.
and with rocks, Middle Easterners and terrorists, and there's 11,000 of them. They would have entered the labor pool, right? And so we're not going to have that steady flow of immigration. We already know that it's gotten very tough at the border. Just generally, we already know that our immigration officials have taken a very hard stance on even the kind of legal forms of immigration, and so it's a very slow-moving process. So these commercial guys, our friends in the commercial multifamily world, say, no matter what your political stance is, and this, I was very impressed that this guy said this. Not impressed, but I was surprised. He just said, no matter what your political values are, we're a nation of immigrants, and that is how we have always kind of grown our economies, through immigration. And so as we slow down on letting people in, then we're going to have less people in the workforce. That's going to impact us, in basically every industry that you can imagine, but particularly the ones that Houston's, as you'll see, growth is based on, which is restaurants, manufacturing, retail, construction. I forget what the top one was, but we'll see in just a little bit. Anyway, so this isn't going anywhere in 2019. We're still going to have these high construction and labor and materials costs, and we're still going to have this labor shortage issue, okay? It's kind of our normal right now. We don't really know what's going to happen. We just know that it's certainly not going to get any cheaper to build a house in 2019, which makes it that prices are not going to be any lower in 2020, okay? And then another thing that we've acclimated to pretty well is this kind of energy price uncertainty, okay? So we'll click through a couple of headlines here in just a little bit. But even over the last 2 months, we finally got our bearings back with the price of oil. And then it goes from about $75 a barrel to like low 40s. I don't think we got into the 30s. I can't remember over the last 2 months, but that's a big drop to get to the 40s from the 70s over 2 months or whatever. But it's kind of like the stock market, as we'll talk about, is that we think it's going to be this like huge deal to our economy. But I think that after the kind of tumult of 2013 through 2016, having to go like this so drastically and having to experience this kind of prolonged pause in our broader economy and our housing market secondarily, that we just can't care anymore, right? So we don't react the same way as we did at that time. I think Harvey was a really good test of that, because everybody expected the floor to fall out from beneath us because of Harvey, but we had just been through this kind of terrible up and down kind of, really rapid cycle in 2013 to 2016. It's like we were just like, you know what, we still need houses, people still need to move, you know what I mean? Let's help each other out and let's not freak out so much. So I think that's what's going to happen in 2019, is that we'll continue to see stuff like this. Oh, hang on. We'll come back to that. We'll continue to see stuff like this. So this is from the paper today. Natural gas on a hot streak. As oil swoons, prices have hit highs fueled by winter's rising demand. So we're talking about the cost. So right now the storyline is that we have a lot of gas. So the gas prices are lower, but then what this article is basically saying was that that's going to be offset by the rise in natural gas for like heating your home and that sort of stuff. But anyway, this is characteristic of the kind of headlines we're seeing already today. We're probably going to see a lot of, right? Why would I put that down? Oh, bummer. Okay, anyway. Go read the paper. You'll see stuff about oil prices going kind of up and down and all that sort of stuff. But I just think that we're pretty well acclimated to that. It's just not going to be as big of a deal as it was in January 2015, right? Whenever people just got so spooked. I just don't think we're going to have that again at any point next year.
Do you think part of that
I think so, yeah. I do. I think that they got so ridiculous. so they had to come down at some point. They just came down with the big crash, right? And I am still concerned that we didn't learn the lesson of those couple of years. And that we're now really ramping up this kind of West Texas, Permian Basin oil and shale oil and fracking and drilling and all that sort of stuff. I don't think we really learned the lesson. And so who knows, maybe we're going to ramp up production and we're going to like try to shut down OPEC or whatever. And then we're still going to find ourselves with so much oil that the price is going to drop again. Who knows? Who knows?
I have the same fear sometimes from when I see apartment complexes ramp up the way that they are.
Yeah.
Because I went through that crash in the early 80s.
Yeah.
Where I worked for a company where we did payroll and ledgers and various different things for oil and gas companies. And we saw them go from a payroll of 900 employees to 9. And you had because of the oil prices, because of the boom, because of things were going on, they had overbuilt apartment complexes in such mass quantities, so that when that happened in the early 80s, 83 or something along those lines, it just all of a sudden you had just apartment complexes that were just empty.
Yeah.
So sometimes when I see the mass production and building of those apartment complexes too, it takes me back 30 years and makes me wonder, did you forget? Is it that so far long ago that you forgot what happened? And again, it was all oil and gas related, and everything else. So
I think we do just forget. Honestly, I just think we forget.
I don't, but they all have me.
Seriously affected the housing market in general because we had a savings in low prices.
Yes.
And all these oil people all lost their houses to foreclosure.
Mm-hmm.
So it was the downturn in the oil market affected every part of Houston's economy.
Yeah.
I do
It
think
was so cheap to live here, and I moved in '85.
I do
was
think
so
we've
cheap.
diversified our
We have, we'll
economy
see,
here
yeah.
so that we are not so oil based as we were in the early 80s.
Yes.
So I do take some comfort from that. I do think we've learned.
We have in that respect.
we've
In our
learned from
hiring
that.
and kind of the way we kind of structure our economy, we really have. Mark?
Yeah, just in the oil industry, coming from that.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Having been a geologist, the corporate memory on these is very short, but they always talk about valuing their people. But when it comes to crunch time, the geologists, the geophysicists, the engineers are the first people they let go.
Yeah.
And these are a lot of your highly compensated technical people.
When you
and-
said, yeah.
And then they're gone.
Right.
And you only go through a certain number of these and you bail out of the industry entirely. It's undone with this.
Right.
And you saw the same thing happen in the 70s. It happened again in the 80s. It happened again a couple of years ago. And I had friends coming to me and saying, you should get back in business. It's like, are you kidding me? I just re-earned, I would go back into the oil and gas industry.
So this is like the weirdest saving grace, but the thing that may finally interject itself into this kind of whole cycle that we're talking about, this incredibly short memory, is you just cannot escape these, realities catching up to us of climate change. And whether you're a climate change skeptic or just whatever, it's even if you just read the paper, it's just you can't get away from these headlines talking about the effects of climate change. And these guys, this room of really rich guys, again, completely apolitically, kind of value neutral about it. We're just, climate change is going to be our major disruptor, right? And so it will become impossible to go through those cycles that y'all are talking about. And that's kind of a good thing because that means that our housing fluctuations won't be tied necessarily to because there's going to be some major disruption and there's going to be some major kind of windfall, and it's going to affect all of us equally. Climate change, as these guys are describing it, is going to be some kind of great equalizer in our market. So I'm not saying that's going to happen in 2019. What I'm saying is going to happen in 2019 is we're going to hear about it. Literally, it's like 2 major articles in section A of the Chronicle every day. And so will become more, right, than whatever it is today. And so it's just going to be more of a discussion that we're having. And I just think, whether your clients have some, investments in commodities or energy or something like that, whether they work for that industry, it's going to start to have this really big effect on our economy. We don't know what it's going to look like. All we know is that in 2019, it's going to become an unavoidable topic. It's going to be something that we can't pretend doesn't affect at least our perception of the market. These guys, very positive about everything else, very negative about the disruptive effect of climate change over time. In 2019, it's just going to become kind of a household topic in a way that it hasn't been in the last, who knows, ever. So those are their takes. That good, bad, and ugly are the takes of these money guys and the commercial and multifamily touching the residential single family kind of market, and their kind of takes on the market or whatever. They did touch on, in that study with PwC, they did touch on the actual emerging trends in real estate. It's nothing we don't talk about in the 2 Tuesdays a month that we visit here, honestly. In the commercial multifamily world, people want more mixed use. They want amenities, whether it's a gym inside or you partner with the 24-hour fitness across Elgin, and you have a discount there. People just want kind of this whole lifestyle all integrated into their housing and into their work life. Okay, companies are tending toward less space, so they need less parking because people kind of come and go. It's not like everybody works from 9 to 5 anymore. And so it's not like the parking lot is full with your 60 employees from 9 to 5. Everything is just a little squishier than it's been. And then the merging of this kind of lifestyle and co-working space, right? So we, on Tuesday, talked about our kind of vision for this co-working space in the new office. I think we're going to call it The Study at Boulevard Realty. It's kind of cheesy, but we like it. But that kind of models what I guess someone like me, just the way I kind of tend to live my life. I live across 2 houses. I rent across 2 houses that are across the street from each other. Both of them are near things that I really like. When I come into the office, I know it annoys the shit out of everybody, but I bounce around from space to space. I don't have a dedicated desk. I don't go to my dedicated desk. I like walking to Red Desert Dive. I like walking to Antidote. That they're saying that those kind of lifestyle trends these days, I don't have a car, so I don't need parking space at the new building. That those are starting to just model our development patterns in the commercial and multifamily world. The way we build retail, the way we build apartments, the way we build hotels, and all that sort of stuff. In the general industry, and I did not want to spend any time today talking about industry trends in real estate because it's just so boring. The only things I'll say is that as a real estate industry, we're starting to see a rise in consumer sentiments about what they call ESG, environmental, social, and governance kind of values or whatever. So just on the biggest kind of view of consumer demand, consumers are connecting more with companies that seem to have some kind of environmental consciousness, some kind of social impact, some social good, and very transparent governance, right? So whatever, make of that what you will. Same thing that I was just talking about, this kind of millennial impact on the way people work and the way real estate, the way the real estate industry is developing. Everybody wants to use their phone or their watch and all that sort of stuff. And so that has affected the way we do business as realtors. That Susan's career today and the way she interacts with her clients today is very different from what it was whenever she started 20 years ago. And that's this kind of trend that's going to continue. And then in single family housing, it's all about transportation and density. Go listen to Bill's Metro Next Stop podcast, episode 6, real estate's hottest new amenity. It's broken up into 2 parts. The first one is about this mid-rise, luxury mid-rise they're building in Midtown from these developers in Melbourne, Australia, who wanted to be in Midtown next to the rail. And then I don't know the pricing of it. I don't even really know what it's called. And I don't know the financing of it or whatever. So but it was just interesting. And then you have Bill's kind of segment talking about how, it's just not so bad to live at the corner of Studewood and Bayland anymore, the corner of Studewood and Highland, because as you get Sonoma and Sonoma stays open for 8 years, then people feel safer and acclimate to the lifestyle of being across the street from a major thoroughfare and all that sort of stuff. So nothing we don't already talk about.
Said it puts them closer to the things they want to get to, and they don't necessarily want to live in the middle of the block anymore.
Yeah.
Because they have to walk through the middle of the block to get to the corner to access the place that they want to go.
Right.
They would rather be closer and are willing to live on the corner or the one end.
Yeah.
Because it gets them closer to where it is that they want to go, because they're walking, or they're ride sharing, or they're biking, or other kinds of things. So
it's
not
just an
thinking about-
option. Yeah. I mean, nobody thinks that in Woodland Heights, that the vast majority of, his buyers that are coming into Woodland Heights at the 1.5 or 1.2 million in a price segment, nobody thinks that they really want to walk. They just want to shorten their commute. They don't want to go to River Oaks District to have a good dinner. They want a better restaurant to open down there. I was going to say the name of restaurants I don't like. So we're going to see these headlines that have to do with energy and disruption and uncertainty, particularly in the world of energy. Told you about this when this is in the paper today. We're going to see a lot of stuff like this. This was in the New York Times yesterday. They reprinted it in the Chronicle today. Greenhouse gas jumps like a speeding freight train. We're going to see all of that all through 2019. I don't really know if I'm you and I'm working with a client who works in the energy industry. I wouldn't even know what to tell them, honestly. I just wouldn't know what to tell them. We're just all going to learn together what it means to live in a world where we're constantly talking about carbon emissions and climate change and whatever. We're fighting with the sun lately. Like that is one of our potential solutions to climate change that we would have never envisioned before. We're way past the point of drive less, recycle, and all that sort of stuff. We're having to literally talk about fighting the sun to dim it. Because there's really no way outside. There's no way out of the kind of path that we're on whenever it comes to greenhouse gas emissions. So again, value neutral is just a reality of the fact. And then tied to climate change, we're going to start to see some particular headlines that do directly impact us in our local market. So this is on NPR 2 days ago. And this is about Del Mar, which I guess is near San Diego or something like that in California, but it's a coastal town. We don't think of Houston as a coastal town, but it is. We're a coastal plain. And so, as Bill goes on and does his floodplain classes, it's all about how the water just wants to flow from Cypress down to Galveston Bay and everything. So that's the kind of coastal plain we are. But here, they're actually dealing with rising seawater too, which when it rains and there's more storm surge or whatever. But this is a very interesting article because it's basically talking about their flood mitigation strategies, which include, they don't call them buyouts, but it's basically, I think they call it ceasing or real estate ceasing or something like that. But it's in effect areas that are grossly devalued because not today, not tomorrow, but over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, then the water is just going to rise up to the point, where it's going to flood these houses. And so realtors today are already seeing consumers, buyers with that knowledge, and it's impacting their bottom line. Yeah.
Do you know if the new floodplain maps due out in a few years take into consideration rising sea levels?
They do. Yeah, they do. And it's still, you look at two things. You look at the rainfall. It has two major components. One is the rainfall, which is what NOAA does, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And then you look at topography, which includes, what percentage of your land is above sea level and where the sea level is. So yes, they will. Mm-hmm.
Is there any article on that?
Probably, I don't know. In the most recent slides that I'll send to you from Bill's presentation, we have similarly, we have a headline that you could Google that will take you to an article talking about those 2023 updates. It's a Houston Public Media article. So you can go to Houston Public Media, look up, new flood maps or something like that, and it'll talk about just that. So this is an interesting thing put yourself in the shoes of these realtors who are talking, and they're very emotional because it's directly impacting their livelihood, that buyers are already starting to retreat from these not flood prone areas necessarily, but areas that are going to be impacted by rising sea levels. They just apply everything that they're saying to flooding in Houston, okay, in a climate change world. There's plenty of good news in 2019. So Bill and I were way off. We projected 45,000 new jobs in Houston in 2018 very conservatively. And we ended up, to be fair, the Greater Houston Partnership was also off. Our number came, within a couple thousand of each other, but we actually have created 85,000 new jobs in 2018, which is really, really good for us. And so that is why you kind of see these, buyers out in the marketplace that are holding out for this perfect house and don't really seem to care whenever interest rates raised a quarter point last, winter or whatever, because our entire real estate market is tied to jobs, because that is the demand for people not only moving into the market, but then getting relocating here, but also getting promotions and getting raises and, selling one house to move into a nicer house, I think moving up or whatever is people are saying. So this is really good for 2018. We created 85,000 new jobs in 2018, net new jobs. 2019, so last year we projected, Boulevard, Greater Houston Partnership projected 40,000, and we were going to be happy with that in a year after Harvey and 2 years out of an oil downturn. And so now we're saying it's going to be even better for 2019. We're going to create 71,000 new jobs. So it is the most succinct way to tell a seller that we think it's a good time to list their house, is because the demand for their house is going to be driven by these 71,000 new jobs that were created and the 85,000 people who were employed last year that are going to be able to hold on to those jobs and put a little bit more money in the bank and buy a house in 2019. Very, very good. We just think that's a really, really good thing.
Ted Jones years ago said that 7 new jobs means 1 new house, and so that would be 10,000 new houses. Do you have any idea if that's still an accurate number, and where these houses are expected, where they're mostly expected to be?
Yeah. We'll find out on Tuesday, January 9th, because I know he'll give that update or whatever, but this is all spread out. Honestly, out of those 71,000 new jobs, a good chunk of them, because it's in this manufacturing construction, as the top 2 categories, are going to be in Texas City, where Ann's looking for those warehouses or whatever, Yeah, and so it's going to be spread out. I can't say that, I don't even know that we would be able to pinpoint, is it going to be inside the loop? Is it going to be outside the loop? And just generally, it's a good thing for the economy, so people have more confidence in going and buying, no matter where they live or where they work. My concern would have been if all those jobs were tied to oil and gas. But if you look at the top categories for job creation, healthcare is number 1, construction is number 2, which is very surprising. This is like 9,000 jobs. This is like 8,000 jobs. Manufacturing is like 5,000 jobs. So it's very diversified. If those are your top 3 categories and they're just 10% of your new job creation, that is a very healthy, diversified economy. Very different from what we've had in the past, where oil and gas was top 3 or whatever. Ted Jones likes to talk about how that kind of discretionary, leisurely consumer spending is a great indicator for the market. Restaurants and retail, which are kind of, tourism, but also just kind of discretionary spending, are the 5 and 6 number of top job creation. Oil and gas is 11, which is like the lowest it ever really gets. And that's like 1,900 jobs. So I forget just now whenever we're talking about, how all these people lose their jobs, you went from 909 employees, something like that. That just can't happen in 2019. It's not like we're going to hire all these people like we did in 2013 and then have to lay them all off in 2015, which is really good for our economy just because it's means that we have, more perspective, more diversification. 13 of those jobs are in real estate, including property management, rentals, and all that sort of stuff. Which is, again, not that many. It's like 1,600 jobs or something like that. They'll probably all be Compass.
But don't they think that the oil and gas jobs are going west, right?
Yeah, no. I don't think so. They're not going away. That's net new
But
job
they're-
creation.
The growth in that area is west because of Permian.
It's true.
Because of all this.
Yeah, it's not even falling on our numbers at all. It's not really having any bearing on our numbers, except whatever, downstream. Okay, so just very briefly about these federal opportunity zones. You'll have to just go out and read some articles on it because it's very, very new. But just where these federal opportunity zones are, this is, remember, a national thing. The purple is what so like, let's be honest, again, completely apolitically, do we think that Paul Ryan and whoever in Donald Trump's cabinet helped write this legislation? Do we really think they cared about the level of poverty in these areas? Probably not, okay? And so this is not, a new deal in 2017, 2018. This is, and I'll just editorialize a little bit, this is just a mechanism to use poor communities as a tax shelter. That's all this really is. Bill said it on Tuesday. We think that the worst thing that could happen, we met with local initiatives to support communities or something like that. But they're a grant-making organization that works in kind of affordable housing and all that sort of stuff. They are terrified about what this will mean for areas. So this is us right here. This is the near north side and the north side, which has some really great things going for it. Acres Home, all of these areas that we've been kind of focused on for complete communities, all that sort of stuff. Now, with very little regulation, you can take the money you made from selling your house in California, or the insurance, well, no, that's not a capital gain, but the money you made from selling your house in California so that you can get out of that market, and you can come spend it on anything you want in the near north side. So typically in the past, whenever we've had legislation like this at the federal, state, or local level, they give you some relief on your tax burden. It's been tied to certain criteria you have to meet for the type of housing you build, the type of investment you make. In San Francisco, which is, of course, the other end of the spectrum than from where we are, then they, you have to have 2 sets of community meetings and spend 10% on whatever the community wants, whether it's like a recycling center or something like that. This is unfettered, unburdened. You can take your money and just invest it all right here. So that's probably a little biased, I guess, but it is going to simulate a lot of economic activity in this area, okay? These things are created by a poverty rate of at least 20%, a median family income of less than 80% of the statewide median income, or it's just, which is how you pick up areas like this or like this. It's just contiguous with another opportunity zone. So weird. It's like the weirdest thing. Yeah.
So I'm confused. So the
Yeah.
reason people are freaking out is that the investment that's going into these communities aren't going to help the people who are in those communities,
Yeah.
that they're just going to gentrify and
That's exactly
make
it.
it.
It's because of this. This is this BizNow, which is another thing y'all should sign up for, biznow.com. They create localized real estate reports that come in like 7:30 every morning. And Bill and I happened to see this at the same time this morning. Opportunity zones jacking up prices in neighborhoods already in transition. That's exactly what we expect to now happen in the near north side, in Acres Home, all that sort of stuff.
So you sell something and if you have capital gains, you get it tax-free. If you reinvest in these zones, does it then grow tax-free? Or that's the end of
It does, yeah, it does.
What?
Yeah, it does. It's great. It's a great deal. It's great, honestly. Any one of the following: partnership interests in businesses that operate in a qualified opportunity zone, stock ownership in businesses that conduct most or all of their operations within a qualified opportunity zone, properties such as real estate located within a qualified opportunity zone.
Yeah, it defers the capital gain. But then I buy something in these blue, purple zones.
Yeah.
And I sell it for $100,000 or $100,000 over whatever the thing is later.
The way
Do
I
pay
understand
tax on
it,
that
no,
gain,
the way
or
I
that's
understand it,
tax-free also?
it's just the first tax burden that you're deferring. If you make anything in excess of that in gains late in your near north side, apartment or whatever, then that's separate. This is just for your taxes on that initial deferment or something like that. It's
Right, so that you get tax-free and you go put it over here. Now
Yeah.
that grows and I have a profit that I would normally pay capital gains on.
the way I understand it though, if you sell your near north side apartment, then you're only paying the taxes that you were deferring from your California house sale.
The original?
The original. That's the way I understand it. Go read it because this is brand new. This is a week and a half old. I read half an article on it, honestly. So, y'all have to go look into it
So
for me.
how is that different than a 1030 exchange? It's because you don't have to actually buy a property, you can just buy a share of it.
You can buy a share. Yeah,
So that's how it's different?
that's how it's different. That's how it's different. It is very loose. The reason that nobody quite understands how it works is because even though this is something that is in the tax code, they didn't even put out the language until last week. And so now we're all kind of figuring out what the real implications are. And even the language now is pretty vague. It's pretty vague. So we just don't know. We're learning. Kathleen's homework, over until January 15th is going to be figuring this out for us because we are so confused. All we know is that in the people who have been smart enough to figure it out so far, that all they're doing is going into these neighborhoods and building really expensive apartments. So
And interestingly, the historic or planning commission director introduced a proposal to eliminate the tax credit for single-family renovation.
Yeah.
Except in those zones.
yeah, it's weird. It's just weird. We're all kind of catching up and trying to figure out what it all means or whatever. But like I said, we know it's going to have some impact on our market. And so we're just going to have to figure it out over the course of 2019. These investor guys are very high on it again, because it's like, oh, I don't have to pay taxes on, and I just go spend this money on wherever, with no restriction on what I do with that money. The upside is entirely theirs. The upside is entirely theirs. Anyway, so we're going to figure out about opportunity zones together. I know that we get a lot of questions about the stock market. Where's Jim? Jim's not here. But he gets this question a lot too, because in addition to energy prices, in addition to this just kind of general jobs uncertainty, we've seen the stock market go like this over the last couple of years. And if you would have asked us at the beginning of 2017, if we were going to experience some kind of great negative impact of the stock market fluctuating or crashing or something like that, we would have said, I don't know, it's highly possible. What goes up must come down, right? But what we're learning from these commercial guys and from other kind of, I don't know, just the way people are reacting to these kind of fairly frequent fluctuations is all that liquidity, all that cash that people have to play with is really insulating them from the effects of the stock market, And so like I said, there's an aspect of this that affects our market directly. I know Jim Ford's seen a lot of this. I know y'all have all seen it or whatever, but people don't have money in the stock market anymore when they're really savvy investors and whenever they've been in this game for a long time. They just give it to their kids as a down payment for their house. And that's how these young kids are able to buy these $750,000 houses on Tulane and, you know, $500,000 houses on West Gardner and all that sort of stuff. It's because their parents find that to be a much safer investment than playing in the stock market. And they're just kind of keeping it flowing or whatever, totally separate from the ups and downs of the stock market. I just think this is so fun because I don't like to play in the stock market. It's just scary and doesn't make sense to me. But if you go to acorns.com, it's this wonderful app that invests your spare change. If I go to Antidote and I spend $3.96 on a cup of coffee, they're going to take 4 cents from that transaction, take it out of my bank account, they round it up, and then they invest that money in the stock market, right? So very little amount of money to play with, but then you feel this buy-in. And so then you open up your app and you see how the market did yesterday and over the last month and over the last 6 months or whatever. So it's a good way to stay plugged in so you can have an informed discussion about how the stock market's performing. It's mostly ETFs and all that sort of stuff, but S&P 500 too. Just so you can have some kind of interest in it. For me, Brandon saved like thousands of dollars through Acorns or something like that. So it's cool. I think I've made $1,000 in the last year or whatever for my spare change. Anyway, so that's the stock market. So I'm wrapping up right now. You have these slides or whatever. All of this is to just kind of give you a working knowledge of some of these economic indicators that people may not even know to ask about or may come to you and have some question about. We just think it's good to have this stuff in your back pocket. It is going to be very competitive in 2019, the same way it's been in since 2013, 2014. Anybody could sell a house. It's been getting increasingly competitive, and it's only going to get more competitive, especially so when Bill, Brandon, and I went to San Francisco in July, I had barely heard mention of Compass before, and we're in the Uber on the way from the airport to our hotel or whatever, and it is just plastered with billboards and bus shelter ads, and then you started to get the targeted ads on your Facebook newsfeed and on Huffington Post and all that sort of stuff. That's going to happen here now that they're in our market. The ads are very vague because even if you're just like your average kind of home buyer, home seller, you can't really even tell what they do. But then you see more Compass advertising. So then you see more Zillow advertising. And so in 2019, our audience, our target customers are going to be so barraged with advertising that they're going to be curious about whether or not there's some deal out there to be had. The only way we are going to make it as individuals and as a company is by meeting people with this insane amount of knowledge that we have. And you have to have started yesterday, right? So that's why we're having these 3 hours of training a week or just whatever. And this is just, we just want to start the conversation, and we want to teach you how to fish so that you start following this stuff too, right? You get the ULI newsletter, you get the BizNow newsletter, you have a little Acorns account, unless you actually invest in the stock market, which is fine. Kathleen likes it, I guess. And so there has to be some way that you could, at any moment, you're at these holiday parties or whatever, that you can convey to people the sheer breadth of your knowledge. So we have, we focus on the neighborhood stuff, the historic districts or whatever, floodplain stuff or just whatever. It's not going away. It's just not going away. It is the only way that we are going to stand out, charging 6% and making buyers get a survey and, just competing with all of the Compasses and the Redfins. It is just the only way we will ever stand out. So it's not going to go away. We think that is our strength as a firm, is our training, but we want to teach you how to confidently speak to this sort of stuff, and how to, kind of keep that education ongoing. So that's what we did today. And what we're going to do, I don't know, a couple times a month, every month. Okay, that's all. Does anybody have questions? It's already late.
Great stuff.
Erin, will you have the dates of the different trainings, maybe for